if you hear snorting and gruff sounds in the background, it's my dog Mo. She's sleeping, and so she every once in a while she scratches and pushes out and makes noises, and it's not my stomach growling or me snorting, it's my dog.
Hey, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hey, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
How you doing?
Hello. Hey,
Aloha.
Simon. It's Skylar. How you doing?
Hello.
Hello, Simon. Hello.
Hey,
Hey
This
Simon.
is Conversations
Hello,
with
Simon.
Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, thoughts, and folk and fairy tales from our elders, and I am your host, Simon Brooks, and today I have a bit of a head cold. This is a meeting with professional storytellers. I decided to travel around the country when I could to interview some of the elders in the community of traditional storytelling. Each storyteller shares their thoughts on our profession and gems of wisdom, and sometimes a story or two. I'm glad you're here. I had heard of Shonaleigh, but I'd never heard her stories. Then Mara Menzies told me about her. British storyteller Shonaleigh comes from an old Jewish tradition. She is a Dreet-zella, who was taught by her grandmother Bubbe, Eldith Marks, around 3,000 stories. These stories are told traditionally in cycles. There are 12 cycles, and each cycle has 8 subcycles, and each of these subcycles contain between 120 and 300 stories, if I got that correctly. Some stories are short, but some are incredibly long, and the stories date from around 5 BCE until around 17th century. They make the Odyssey look like a Saturday morning cartoon. Shonaleigh is a wonderful and funny lady. I was very excited to talk to her. So, without further ado,
The lady I'm about to talk to has a library inside her head. And when I say that, I don't mean like the library behind me of 250 books. I'm talking about, the Library of Congress library in her body. She knows about 3,000 stories. Please welcome Shonaleigh.
Thank you very much. It's great to be welcomed. I was never very good in academia, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I had so many stories in my head that had so much common sense. I didn't really need it a lot of the time.
Well, there you go. I might use that line myself.
Feel free, my friend. Feel free.
So those of you who are listening, you'll probably realize that she's not an American. She's actually British. And you come from originally, because you said you come from up north, but you originally come from further down south by the sound of it.
Much further, well, much further than you're thinking as well, Simon. But my family come from Enschede in the Netherlands, and I lived there till I was 7, and then I moved to London, or the outskirts of London, where I lived for quite a few years. But I now live, well, some would say God's own country, Yorkshire. I live actually on the border in Bronte country, which is rather lovely, northeast Derbyshire.
Bronte country. Well,
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a few listeners that will like and be envious about that.
Wuthering Heights, 7
Yeah.
minutes from our back door, you
Oh,
can
really?
wander around and look wistful, pale and interesting. It's quite marvellous.
So you started off in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a beautiful place.
Oh, yes, it is glorious. And interestingly enough, quite flat, but excuse me. Even to this day, I work best when I can see a horizon.
Really?
If I can see a horizon, or I'm walking, a lot of my tradition is about walking the story. You don't learn the story from text, you walk. To be able to walk and to see horizons or be in that vast expanse of space where the light is changing and the sounds are coming at you from different angles and different times of day. So So yes, I go back there a lot. I work over there quite a bit, and I love it. I just love it so much. And but I also love where I live as well. It's hard, isn't it, when you're traveling for work as well, because
Yeah,
you see so much majesty around the place, but it's also different.
it is. It is. You get to meet all sorts of different people that have different ideas of certainly in the States, you know. I mean, you know, having grown up in the UK, I know that there's a lot of difference and variety in the UK, but I haven't lived there for about 30 years, so I'm sure things have changed a lot. But yeah, people are different all over the place. You can just, you know, go an hour away and people are different.
Mm, mm.
So growing up, did I know you heard a lot of stories. Where did you hear
Ooh, just a few.
where did you hear the stories from?
All around, actually. I'm mainly my Bubbe, my grandmother.
Uh-huh.
But our house was full of stories, full of music. My grandfather was a musician, my aunt was a singer. So there was always music and story. But my Bubbe was a Drut'syla, so she held this tradition. And I think because the community that she would have originally have served didn't exist anymore. You know, after the war, those communities didn't exist. So she kind of poured it into me, and the house was always full of story. But every day I would be learning stories, thrashing stories, walking stories.
So the Dreet-zella, they would have been the storyteller for the community. Is that right?
Yes, it's peculiar to the Netherlands. I get a lot of
Oh, I didn't know that.
academics going, "Oh, we've never heard of this." And because I'm
I-
a famous academic and I've never heard of it, it obviously doesn't exist. And I think that's really sweet, actually. But yeah, it was peculiar to the Netherlands, and it was so run of the mill. It was like, you know, those red cups, those red disposable cups you have in the States.
Yeah.
Would you cherish those? No. 90% of them probably end up in landfill.
Right.
And I think the tradition was like that. The women learnt it. It was an oral tradition.
Right.
It was not that cherished because it was just something you did every night. You listened to stories, and the stories ran in cycles. And so they were just commonplace. But once those communities, like anything, started to disappear, the people that told those stories started to disappear. And because it was a woman's tradition and an oral tradition, you can imagine being a little Jewish old lady, or even a young Jewish lady, because my Bubbe would have only been in her 30s, I guess, been in the war. Your chances of survival in Europe were pretty slim.
Right.
So it went from being very commonplace on people's tongues. First World War, big movement of people, big changes in communities. So it became a little less vibrant or robust. And by the end of the Second World War, it was pretty much extinct.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I look at what's going on in the world today, you know, and it's a lot of these traditions, you know, when people are scattered and broken up, right? That's what happens, right? Their culture is torn apart, and those stories are lost, and their culture's lost, even, right? So your grandmother, she told you a lot of stories. Did she tell your mother these stories as well, or did your mother know of these?
The tradition works that it goes from grandmother to granddaughter.
Oh,
Now, there are reasons for that, which I can explain if you'd like. But
yes, please.
okay, so the tradition would be passed down from grandmother to the eldest granddaughter, basically. And that's for two reasons. If you think about it, in a traditional family at that time, the mother would have been possibly running the business. The things open to a lot of Jewish families were innkeeping or trading, or all of these things. She would have been helping run the business. She would have had about 10 children, and she would have been running a home. She would not have had the time to pass it on.
Yeah.
That's quite a practical thing. And also, if you think about it, you have a different relationship with your grandparents that you do with your parents.
That's true.
Very different relationship.
And
So
the grandparents
it
have with
leads.
their grandchildren as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my mum started to learn the tradition from her grandmother, but with the outbreak of things in Europe, my Bubbe bribed somebody, because my aunt had got married and come to the UK. It was a source of great consternation in the family, because she'd married this guy, and they hadn't totally approved, and she'd gone to the UK. But it meant that she had relatives in the UK. So my Bubbe bribed one of the people on the last kinder transports going out of Europe to take my mum. And so my mum went and lived with her aunt for the whole of the war. But what that meant was she didn't get any more of the tradition. She didn't get any more training and the stories. And
how old was your mum then?
Let's see. 29. I think she was about 11.
Okay.
12, something like 11 or 12. I don't know, 28, 39. Yeah, she would have been sort of that sort of age group. I know she was old enough to carry a baby, because that's what they wanted. They'd got babies and they needed people to carry babies.
Right.
And a lot of the kids that went over carrying babies had to come back.
Oh my gosh.
The UK didn't let them in. But because my mum had got a relative and a letter, she went, and so she spent her war in Wapping Docks. But that, as I often say, is another story for another time. But yeah, so that was interrupted for her. And then after the war, my Bubbe was in the camps and they were liberated. And I think a lot of people think, oh, that must have been, this wonderful kind of romantic story. And it really wasn't, because you had to be tested for TB first before you were allowed to move anywhere. And so many families that had survived and been reunited had to split up again, because you couldn't go to America if you tested positive for TB. You couldn't go to Europe, anywhere else in Europe. But my Bubbe was clear. And so she came to the UK for a bit. And then eventually, when I was born, in the 70s, she was my primary carer.
That's awesome.
And I think that's why I got the tradition, because there was no community. Excuse me, there was no community that I could have served as a Drut'syla. They didn't exist. But my brother always used to say it was the stories that kept her sanity. And
I bet.
She just poured them into me, and she poured the training into me, and the cycles, and the way to remember them, and the way to ask questions, and the way to walk with them. And so she did that from the age of about 4. So I don't think I'm anything spectacular or even clever. It's just like anything. I got the bag of sweets really early. Or I got the training, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time at the right age,
Yeah. And that's
it wasn't all
definitely...
this magical. Do you ever get people got some what on game? It must be marvelous to be a traditional bearer. It must be so lovely. What do you know? Oh, I'm not allowed to swear, am I?
That's all right.
Can you edit that out? In England, that's not swearing.
I know it's not. It's fine.
It's flipping not. Because there were times I wanted to go out and play and do exciting things, and my brother would say, "You've just got to learn this little bit first, and then you can." And I didn't want to. Now I look at it and I'm so glad. And
Right.
it's like I've started to teach them to my son, and somebody said to my son, because my son doesn't want to be a storyteller, he wants to be a lawyer.
Well, yes, you know, I've said this before on this show, but there's storyteller Bill Harley here, he's down in Rhode Island.
I know, Bill, yeah.
Yeah. So he says the difference between a family-sized pizza and a storyteller is that a family-sized pizza can feed a family of 4.
Yeah.
So I can understand your son wants to be a lawyer and not a storyteller.
Well, that's what he says. He says, I don't want to have to tell the stories. I want to tell them because I want to tell them.
Yeah.
And somebody said to him one day, Isaac, because he's in his 20s, why do you want to learn the stories? And he just went, I don't. And they went, well, why are you learning them then? And he said, because my 40-year-old self came and visited me and said, if you don't learn the stories and the wisdom and the common sense that they contain, I am going to kick your butt round the park. So he says, I'm actually not learning them for me, I'm learning them for my 40-year-old self.
That's awesome that he has that sense. Because there are some people that, some 20-year-olds, teenagers, 20-year-olds, whatever you want to, they're not interested in that, right?
No, they're not. No,
That's
it's
awesome.
he says it actually helps him with his hobbies. I think they are so relevant. Do you ever get the thing, what relevance are traditional stories in today's world? And you go,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
have you ever met a soldier that can't speak of what they've seen?
Yeah.
Have you ever met a child that's been abandoned?
Yeah.
Have you ever met somebody that needs a dream or needs magic to carry on? Of course, they're flipping irrelevant.
Or even hope, right? Even something as little as hope. I mean, yeah.
My Bubbe had a saying, which a lot of people use, and if you'd like to use it, you are also welcome. She used to say, her name was Eldith Marks, if you ever want to give her a check. She used to say, not every story, she would say, Liebling, not every story has a happy ending, but every story that you walk must begin with outrageous hope.
Yeah.
I love that phrase.
I do too. And there's a quote that you have from her on your website, which I also liked, which is, when the world is crying, it doesn't need more tears. It needs a handkerchief.
Yes, she was very, very practical like that. I have so many sayings of hers.
So you're going to do a book of her sayings?
I'm about to publish one. Actually.
Yay! That's awesome.
It's going to be called Bubbe's Wednesday Wisdoms, and because she used to come out with some just cracking ones,
Yeah.
I've got one here actually that I wanted to share with you.
Okay.
And it says, people who don't know about storytelling think that telling a story is like singing a song. The singer sings, the teller tells, the listener listens. But if the singer was singing on top of a mountain miles away from anyone, they could still sing the same song. Storytelling isn't like that. The storyteller is like a musician, but the listener is his instrument. The listener is like a violin, and the story is like a bow.
I love that, because it's true. I mean, how often do we sing for ourselves and give ourselves joy? But trying to tell a story to yourself, it's you can't. You need a story needs an audience.
Well, I think a story is a dialogue.
Yeah, it is.
It is a dialogue between you and whoever is listening.
Yeah, it is
definitely. So yes, I think. I mean, I find it fascinating because again, you have people that because we don't call them fairy stories, we call them wonder tales.
Oh, and this is in the Jewish tradition.
Yes, and in Europe a lot as well.
Okay.
If you, they are called fairy stories, but that kind of came in with Grimm.
Right, it did. Yeah.
But up to then, you had myths, you had legends, you had wonder tales, you had folklore, and
Right.
folk tales are exactly what it says on the tin. It's tales of the folk, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And folk tales teach you street smarts.
Yes, they do.
You know, I say to some of my students, they go, "Oh, it's like they're magic, they're wonderful." And they go, "Well, if you think about it, if they were there to teach you morals, Jack and the Beanstalk would be there to teach you that it's all right to invade someone else's country, it's all right to kill, it's all right to steal, and stupidity is its own reward." That's not what it's there. It teaches you street smarts,
Yeah.
how not to be dumb,
Yes.
how to, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Wonder Tales teach you about magic, and magic teaches you, as we were saying earlier, about hope,
Yeah.
how to survive in a relentless world, how to have a dream that will, you know, eventually bring you forward.
And I think I think it's also related to faith. You know, no matter what faith you come from, I think you know, Wonder Tales, that magic in some way is a form of faith, right?
Good. Yes,
It's a
and
form
I
of faith in the world around us to, you know, if we're open to it, to come to our rescue. And I'm a firm believer that that's the case. You know, if we're open to the world around us, then, you know,
I believe
magic happens.
totally believe the stories while I'm telling them. Totally.
Yeah,
I totally believe them. There are so many of them, and they have seen me through so much, and taught me so much in a way that, you know, having someone point out the obvious wouldn't have done. Do you know? Sorry,
go on.
just
No, go on.
segueing into a small rantette here. I was 16 years old before I ever read a story where a woman had to be rescued from a tower. Never read that before. I mean, my stories, there's a story about the Walnut Girl, and she strides around. Nobody else can rescue the prince. She rescues a prince from a Sheddakin, which is kind of a quite a predatory kind of demon chaos entity. She rescues him. He falls in love with her and goes, "I want to marry you." And she goes, "Well, I don't want to marry you, mate. I'm the Walnut Girl, and I was born for adventure." And off she goes, you know.
That's like, well, yeah, it's kind of like Tatterhood is a bit like that, right? I mean, the two sisters do end up getting married, but it was on their terms, right?
Yes, and there's so much that's empowering that's been damped down, and
Right.
and Disneyfied. Sorry, I'm going to upset some of your listeners now.
No, that's fine.
Or, you know, Disney's lovely, bless them.
Yes.
But they do tend to Disneyfy everything. It's
do.
like, and that's not how the world is. And I think the stories that I inherited were as sandy and as bitter and I'm going to say the word dirty, and I don't mean dirty as in salacious. I mean
Right.
dirty as in the world is not a clean place.
Right.
Decisions
Getting your hands
we make are
dirty.
not clean.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so those stories have to reflect that. And I think sometimes we want all our stories to be lovely.
Right.
How do we learn, you know,
Right.
from stories? And so you can tell a story that you don't like, I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
as
Okay.
long as you're not standing up on a stage and I mean, I always invite discussion whenever I tell a story. I was like, "How do you feel about that? What do you think about that?" I laugh it when in the UK and in Europe, people are so used to my style, people will interrupt me while I'm telling to ask questions. And that's perfectly normal for a Drut'syla. I absolutely love that. Freak my husband out, who's a folklorist.
Oh, he is?
He often joked that his only way to get his hands on the tradition was to marry it. Oh, how we laugh. What a romantic.
An academic, is he?
Yeah, bless him, yes. He's my tame I'm a professional wordsmith, you know. He's my tame academic. But yes, so I'm used to that. But I've seen it happen a couple of times, and it completely freaked people out because it's like that's not in the script.
Right.
But it's not a script. It's a story. It's a dialogue. You
Yeah.
don't wake up and go, right, these are the conversations I'm going to have today.
Right.
And if it doesn't fall into that remit, I can't have them. I think that's what story does. It causes a dialogue. And so, yes, I've gone totally off tangent. Can't remember what
No,
I
you
said.
haven't. It's
Haven't I?
no,
Oh, great.
no.
And
Because
then you've got
I think it's true because when storytellers go and tell stories to school kids, it's the same thing. The kids they'll interrupt, right? And the teachers
and they want to interrupt. Yes.
Yeah, and
I remembered what I was going to say. Yes. So I think if I got up and told a story about a complete misogynist, and then swept off stage to great applause, it's like I'm condoning that story.
Right. Yeah.
But I remember there is a story. There's a story about this horrendous man who has an iron tongue. Interestingly enough, there's another story about somebody who has a glass heart, and this young lass said to me when I finished, "I hate that story," and I went, "Great, why?"
Yeah.
And they had all these objections, and we sat there for the next 3 hours over a coffee. And I think it was a bit worrying for the organisers who kept trying to sort of chivvy me out, but I haven't got another drink. And I was saying, but if I hadn't told that story, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and you wouldn't be forming the ideas that you're forming now. Isn't that what storytelling is?
Yeah. It is.
It's like people waft around going, storytelling. I do sound sarcastic, don't I? If I sound a bit sarcastic and bitter, it's probably because I am. But storytelling will not change the world. It won't. Bubbe used to say, it's been around for centuries. If it was going to change the world would have already changed. But what storytelling does, that is unique and wonderful, is if it's done the right way, it can create safe communal spaces where the difficult questions can be asked. And if those difficult questions can be asked and people can sit down and have a dialogue, then the world might change. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that also comes back around to we've been telling stories for thousands of years, and we're still up the creek without a paddle.
Absolutely. So you just got to ripple out the kindness, my friend.
Right. But we are creating those safe spaces where dialogue can happen, and where empathy can be created, and where people can be supported. And if we can't if we can't create a safe world, if we can't change the world, then we can create these safe spaces where people can
know that it's
shake off the crap.
To disagree. It's perfectly all right to not have the same opinions. But yes, so yeah, I've had so many stories in my life because there's such a huge repertoire. I mean, my husband went on to Twilight Tales. We have a thing called Twilight Tales.
Okay. Is that a podcast or what is that?
It's literally. Would you like me to tell you about that in a shameless plug?
Yes, please.
It doesn't cost anything. That was a long time ago.
A long time ago.
Dinosaurs roamed the before lockdown, BL as we tend to call it, or lick down as my dyslexic typing tends to. Oh, I'm sorry I can't come out. I'm in lick down. And then I'd realised I'd sent it and there was nothing I could do about it. But most people know I'm dyslexic, and that's why I have a PA and various other people. But we were trying to record the stories. So it's really hard. And I'm going to give you my husband's email because he has drafts and all sorts of interesting things that I haven't even got in my head and don't want to see. But if you can imagine, there are 12 cycles of stories, okay? The oldest one goes back just before 5th century BC, and the most modern one, and if this is a podcast, I'm doing air brackets at the moment, the most modern one is about 1700s. There's nothing past that, There are 12 cycles, And each cycle contains about 8 subcycles, and each subcycle contains between 120 to 300 stories. A vast amount of those have never been written down.
And you know them all?
They're all in my head. I have a friend who's a surgeon, and one day they want me to tell stories while they're taking a scan of my brain. Now, there is a whole system of learning called drashing. The midrash is a Jewish term. It just means to unpeel through questions to see what's hidden in plain sight. But the Drut'sylas had their own way of midrashing, how to take a story and what's the most... and by asking questions, you expand it, and then you dehydrate it again into one image. And I teach my students a technique, and that one image is like a key image, and you pull up that key image, and then the whole story like reinflates in front of you, and you just tell what you see. That's all you have to do. It's an amazing technique.
Sounds easy.
It takes me 3 years to teach most people, and 7 years for them to kind of go, oh, I get it now.
Yes.
But there's about 200 people out there, whereas 9 years ago there was nobody. So
That's incredible. I was going to ask you, are you training anyone in particular to have your 3,000 stories?
Yeah, well, the way we're doing it, first of all, I'll tell you about my husband's panic.
Okay.
As a folklorist, he said, how are we going to get these stories down? When we started this process, I was 40 and 51 now.
Okay.
And it was taking between 3 and 7 years just to find the time to get down 2 or 3 subcycles, and he was panicking. And one day he said to me, how did you learn them? How did your Bubbe do it? How did she do it? And I said, well, it was very simple, really. We'd drash a story in the morning. I'd walk it for an hour in the afternoon. And in the evening, every evening, after supper, she and I would, she'd tell me the next bit of the story, I'd tell her the bit of the story I'd learned.
So she didn't tell you the whole story, she just told you a part of it.
If you ever hear the stories, Simon, you'll realise they're vast.
Okay.
They are huge stories. They take days to tell. I can tell you a story in 20 minutes. I can tell you a story in 3 minutes. But the actual sub-cycles, so the ruby tree...
Okay.
Well, what he said was, how did your Bubbe do it? And I said, every night. And so he said, well, why don't we do that? Rather than doing these weekends that we do with listeners and that, where you still can't get them all done, why don't you just tell me the next bit each night? And I went, that's a fantastic idea, but you know what's going to happen, don't you? We're going to go, oh, don't feel like it tonight. Oh, watch this on Netflix. Oh, because we're human beings.
Yeah.
And then I had an inspiration. I said, but if we're accountable for someone else, we can't do that because we'll feel slightly ashamed. So we decided to set up a thing. It's just a Zoom meeting called Twilight Tales. There's a Facebook group called Twilight Tales, and the link is pinned at the top of the Facebook. And we started this at the beginning of lockdown, and every single night at 6:30, we'd turn it on, and I'd tell the next bit of the story. We expected a couple of people because we don't ever advertise it because it's free. I mean, if people want to buy a coffee, they can, but they don't have to. It's totally free because our hidden agenda, which isn't really hidden because we tell everyone about it, so I guess it's not really hidden agenda. It's just to record them. We need them. It's not a good quality recording, but then at least we have a recording. And we turned on the first night and there were 70 people in the waiting room.
Holy cow.
Well, yes, I said something very similar, Simon. But maybe a little more expletive. And then
something along the lines of freaking Nora.
Yes, very much so, yes. Oh, how well you speak the mother tongue. And we've welcomed everyone. And we have been now doing Twilight Tales since then. We're up to 3 years now.
Wow.
Every night. Now we've had time off. We actually stopped on the 7th of December because I've had my surgery, and we're back. And the way we're running it at the moment is Simon does the Arthurian stuff on a Monday. I tell Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and we have a guest storyteller on a Wednesday. We've built a community. And we tell every night. Now, we have managed to tell an entire subcycle. And if you go onto the Twilight Tales page, you'll see, Si's printed it out, it's over 1 million words.
Oh my gosh. That's okay.
But there's a whole subcycle down. No, not a whole subcycle, a whole cycle.
Okay, I was going to say, if it's a subcycle, you're going to have to live to be like 150 to get,
I know, we've
get
got
these
the
things
Ruby
out.
Tree, the Diamond Girl, the Opal Forest, the Emerald Sea, the Sapphire Staff. We've got them all, and now they're in writing, which is great. So we've started on the second cycle, which is the cycle of Patient Hillel. They're all named after rabbis. Not because they have anything to do with those rabbis, they're more a geographical date stamp. And again, I tell on a Tuesday and a Thursday and a Friday, and I'm going to start again next week because I've had the week off because I'm poorly. But there's always something happening on that site. And the thing is, what we've created is a whole bunch of people that interact with the stories, that go and do bits of research for us. We found stuff out that I didn't know. And
So these are the listeners that are doing this?
Yes, they're
That's
amazing.
incredible.
They're like mishbucha, they're like family now, you know. And we get between 70, 50, 30, never below 29 people.
Wow.
Because everyone's gone back to work now, but people still come every night to listen. And it's something I'm really proud of, because I think that's what stories are for. You were talking about safe spaces earlier. And the number of times people have said, this has been my sanity through the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's been insanity. Or this story has given me outrageous hope. Or, you know, there's been an awful lot of support that's gone on. And the lovely thing is the connections that have been made that are external of me. You know, people that have met up because of me. So I came over to Timpanogos last year. And
I know,
there were people there from Twilight Tales that didn't know each other, and they all met up, and it was great. But yes, so these stories are being recorded with Twilight Tales. And then I'll segue back to the other question that you've asked, because I'm really sorry, I do get excited.
No, that's fine.
To tangents.
Yeah.
Am I teaching anybody?
Yes.
And the answer is yes, and in different ways. So,
Okay.
I run courses
Right.
where I teach the techniques for
Right.
people to apply to their own practice, their own creative practice. So I have everything from writers, storytellers, librarians, doctors, artists, sculptors, social workers, you know, a whole gamut, anyone, jewelry makers, anyone that for at the core of their practice, narrative is important.
Okay.
I take people on. I run online courses, and then I run a very big course that's like a month long in the UK. But from that, people often say, can I study? I want to learn the stories with you. So they'll come on, and then we'll teach them a little bit further in depth how to drash, how to hold it. And I have about 80 people that are learning. And what we're doing is we're not teaching them all the cycles, because that would be overwhelming and people would lose heart. So what we're saying is, right, we're putting people in teams of 8. And we're saying, right, you're learning this cycle. And you're learning the Ruby Tree, and you're learning the Diamond Girl, and you're learning this, and you're learning that. So that when those 8 people to come together, you have the whole cycle, you know?
That's magical in itself, because it's it's like this secret group, right?
Yeah,
The whole
again,
thing.
not very secret because we tend to tell everyone, but yes, and I love that that what I want to do is just leave this legacy of these stories. You know, it's I think it's important the tradition is acknowledged. I'm not even that bothered about me. Definitely Bubbe would be acknowledged, and all the women behind her that held it.
Right.
So yes, we're teaching. I have quite a few students from the States, actually. I have 3 students that are going to go on and learn some of the traditional stories. They're going to learn. I can't remember which ones they said they wanted to learn because this was it. Oh, it was only decided in November. I have a lovely woman, Cassie Ashton, who is also going to learn a story. Nate Smith, who is an ITC, not ITC, intensive care nurse.
Okay.
How amazing is that? From Knoxville, is going to be learning these stories.
That's so cool. And you got Cassie interested when you were there last year in Timpanogos?
No, I've known Cassie. She's done my Wildwoods course. She's done a 4-year course with me.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to come on and do some mentoring for my students because I think it's important to have mentors on a course because I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you know when you know something really well, you have the curse of knowledge.
Yes.
So you don't say things because you think it's obvious.
Right.
And my
yeah.
mentors are brilliant because they're not in awe of me, which I really like. And they'll go, Shonaleigh, you haven't said that. And I'll go, well, isn't it obvious? And they'll go, no, Shonaleigh, it's not obvious. Get a grip, say it. So they're much better. They're looking at it from a slightly different viewpoint.
Right.
And their job isn't to teach, their job is to walk with the students and they get to do the course again for free and all the rest of it. So slowly we're building up people that are holding these stories, you know, because, you know, what do legends do? Legends teach you about deceit. And so there's so much wisdom there. So my husband phrased it perfectly, actually. He said, folk tales, stuff happens. Wonder tales, stuff happens and there's magic. Legends, stuff happens in places you can visit. Myths and sacred tales, stuff happens and there's gods. Which is a very simple explanation, but I like it.
I like it. I like that too. I mean, it really does sum it up. For an academic, he has a very good touch on reality.
Well, he's married to me. We've got a 20-year-old kid, you know.
So where's your husband from? Is he?
He's
Sorry?
a Fenman. My husband is one of the mysterious Fenmen.
Ooh.
He's from the Fens. His father was a local doctor, and he went to study the classics. He lasted 1 week at Oxford and thought, I can't cope with these pretentious people, so transferred to Manchester. And he now teaches English classics, creative writing and screenwriting. And he's an author, he's a published author as well.
Oh, wow.
But he's from the UK, and he's a Quaker.
Oh, no way. My grandfather was a Quaker, yeah.
Yeah, no, and he is one of the most patient, probably has to be with me, most patient, amazing people. Now, he is my son's stepfather, and he always was, but he's been Isaac's dad all of his life, pretty much. But when Isaac was really little, and Si and I were going to get married, we got married under a chuppah in a Jewish way, but he also wanted to go and have a ceremony in the Quaker church. And you have to have what's known as a meeting for clearness. And then you have to go to the service. And he says it's the first time he's ever seen 2 Jews sit next to each other and not say a word. Isaac kept leaning forward and going, when does it start? And Simon would go, it has, mate. Because you just sit there quietly for an hour.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Quakerism is very different. It's
very, very different. So yeah,
it is. So you mentioned Simon. This is your husband.
Yes, Simon Hayward.
Hayward,
Dr.
right?
Simon Hayward, Heywwood, and
And
he
his,
did a great talk actually for a TEDx talk that you can find on YouTube. It's called Missing the Arrow.
and you can also find it on your website.
Can you?
Yes,
I don't do my website. That's amazing.
Yes, because I kept seeing this Simon guy pop up, and I was
This hairy
like,
guy, yeah.
yes, who is this man that she works with? So,
Yeah. Every
So it
time I
turns out
lose
that-
him in public, I just have to say, he looks like a kind of a weird Viking. And
Yes.
people will go, oh, yeah, he went that way, which is great.
yes, he does. He does. That's awesome. A red-haired Viking, no less, I believe. Strawberry blonde.
Yeah, strawberry blonde Viking. Yes,
Yeah.
bless him. But he's incredible. He's absolutely incredible. So patient. And if it hadn't have been for Isaac and Simon, I wouldn't be doing this. Because what I used to do when I first started telling, I had no idea you could be a storyteller. I learned to tell in my family. That's what I did. That was my heritage, if you like. I would just tell the story. And then I decided I didn't want to, and I wanted to do other things, all of which I was rubbish at.
I'm
So
sorry.
I found.
Can I interrupt and say, is that the universe, God, your faith, telling you this is where you need to be going?
I just think it was my own ineptness and my dyslexia.
Oh, take the magic out of it for me, why don't you?
No. Actually, what it was, Simon, I had this dream one day where I woke up and I can't do it. But actually, I am rubbish at everything else. At the end of the day, I would have been no good at anything else. I did try a few things with hilarious and quite awful consequences. And then I went to a folk thing in the UK, and I listened to some storytelling, and I thought, gosh, that's awful. Because I am also quite a judgmental cow sometimes. And what I have to say was, this was when I was younger, and
Okay.
I have mellowed with age, in that judgmental way that 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds can be.
Yes.
And then I did some gigs for my Bubbe, and I thought, actually, I like doing this. But I didn't think I could ever make a living at it. And then I found I'd gone to drama school, and what I will say is, Bubbe taught me how to tell a story. Bubbe taught me how to ask questions of a story. Bubbe taught me how to unpeel a story and tell it to like I believe it and it's a memory. Bubbe didn't teach me how to stand on stage in front of 2,000 people and project. That's what I got from drama school. And I think I realized you could do this, but I didn't think people wanted my tradition. So I did quite a bad thing. I'm not proud of it. I mind swept my tradition for all the funny stories. Of which there are many.
Right, yeah.
And so I would tell these 3, 5, 10-minute very funny stories. And that's what I thought people wanted from me. And I got a rep as being this very funny storyteller, because I used to do stand-up as well. And then it was the weirdest thing. It was so unsatisfying. And then one day I didn't want to tell the stories, because what I used to see was, I would tell a story, and if you watch Missing the Arrow, you'll get it. I would tell a story, and I would see people in the front row taking notes, because it's tradition, isn't it? So it belongs to everybody.
Oh.
And they'd take notes, but they wouldn't understand the culture that it came from.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying you can't tell stories from other cultures. Please don't take that as a takeaway. But if you are, do your research so that you understand context and you're telling it from a place of skill, not a place of just verbatim,
Thievery.
And I oh, I'll talk about that in a minute. And I thought, I can't tell the really deep, beautiful stories. And I got on stage one day and I told a story. It's The Diamond Girl. And when she is in great sorrow, she cries. And when she cries, diamonds fall from her mouth. And I told it because I knew I could condense most of the story into a 25-minute set, which is, at most places, that's what they want, or 40. And this guy had been taking notes, and okay, that was a beautiful story, but you got it wrong at one point. Now, we all we all say the wrong thing sometimes. It's an oral tradition, and you're not recording it. And sometimes you get the name wrong or whatever. And
Right.
I said, "Oh my goodness, did I? What did I do?" He said, "Well, you have the diamonds when she cries coming out of her mouth." And I went, "Yeah." He said, "They come out of her eyes." I said, "No, they don't." He says, "They do." I said, "Do you know this story?" He said, "No, I never heard of it before, but the diamonds come out of her eyes." I said, "Do you know, in Jewish myths and folklore, there are 32 stories about pearls. Do you know where pearls come from?" And he went, "No." And I said, "Pearls were the first gift that the Creator gave us. They come from your eyes. And the weeping of pearls brings relief. If you have those diamonds, you lose all those pearl stories. The diamonds come from the mouth because you're thinking of beautiful. You're thinking of a beautiful image. But I want you to think about this. You are in sorrow, and there are things you cannot say, and you are pushing that sorrow down, and it hurts in your throat to do so, but it still comes up and it tears you apart. That's what those diamonds symbolize, because her father in the story says to her, "Never let your enemy see you weep, because when they see you weeping, and when they see the treasure that will bring, you will have no peace."
Oh my gosh.
And I said, "And you want to change that?"
Wow. Wow.
So then I didn't tell them for a long time. And now I tell them. And what I get is people coming up to me going, "Oh, I love that story. Could I tell it?" And 90% of the time I say, because I know there's no other versions out there,
Right.
I'll say, and some of the time what I'll say is, absolutely, if you can find a written version of that story out there, then it's out there. It's not for me to say whether you can tell it or not. But you can't tell that version. That version has been drashed through centuries of Drut'sylas. We can trace it back in our family 500 years.
Wow.
That is a story that's been drashed by powerful women who have gone through adversity. You can't just cherry pick that. But if you can find that trope, if you can find that arc, and I often give them places to look, take that and go and do your own work on it. Absolutely, you can tell it.
Yeah.
And then there'll be an odd person that will come up and say, "Can I tell that story?" And I'll go, "Why?" Because I get a feeling, or Bubbe will tap me on the shoulder. Because I don't know about you, but the thing about my ancestors is they never shut up. There's just like a bunch of little old ladies there all the time, with opinions. Sorry.
No, it's all right.
So I'll say, "Why do you want to tell it?" And I had somebody from Canada actually recently say, "Could I tell the paint kettle?" And I'll say, "Well, first of all, go and see if you can find a version. I don't think you will, because it's a very old story that has been held in Hebrew and Flemish dialect. So I doubt whether there's a version out there, but there might be." So God love them, they went and looked for about 6 months, and they came out and said, "I can't find a version of it." It's a really powerful story. I said, "Why do you want to tell it?" And they told me. And I know this person, and I respect this person. And I said, "All right, but I'll teach you the traditional way. And the deal is you tell it for this, but you never tell it for profit. It's not what it's meant for. That is not a story that you get up on stage and tell for profit. Do you want to tell it in a community to heal? I'm happy with that, but you do not do it for profit, because That's not what it's meant for. It's meant for a very different reason. And we never have. They've been really respectful of that. So there's lots of different ways I pass things on.
Could you tell us that story? I'm kidding. I
can tell you the premise of it. It's basically a guy does a deal. He's a really nasty king. It's part of a much bigger cycle. And his name is Charybdis. Horrible man. And he does a deal and he gets this kettle from Gehenna, from Ashmedai. And this kettle he gives to people that are really happy. But every time something happens and it hurts, penny drops in the kettle. And the more you hurt someone, the greater the reward.
Oh.
Until they find this couple who have been happily married, that the way that they can really make a killing is to say things that you can never take back.
Oh.
You know, so they sit there and he says, I never loved you. And it's horrendous. It's horrendous. And the kettle is filling up and filling up and filling up. You know.
Oh.
And it's called the pain kettle. And it has and I have to say, Charybdis gets his comeuppance, and
of course,
you know, and there is a hopeful end to the story. But that's what I mean about, you know, we want our stories to be nice and fluffy, and sometimes they're not.
Right.
And we learn those lessons, but we've been so used to everybody there, and they all got happy and lived happily ever after.
Right. Guilty as charged.
Oh gosh, you know, we all need those stories as well.
We do.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some
lovely stories. Yeah, there's so many lovely ones. Oh gosh, don't. Come to Twilight Tales one night. It's fun. Come next week.
I will.
Miriam's Laughter next week, which is nice.
Okay. All right. And so when do you start the cycle? Or the story?
I started the Song of Lilith. I started the news cycle on the 14th of January.
Uh-huh.
And it's the Song of Lilith. And I always give a recap. And I've been doing it kind of sporadically because just when I think I'm okay, I think my immune system is struggling after the operation. It's like, I can't string a sentence together. So I'm starting again back on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, whatever the date that is.
Okay.
And we've only got as far as the young queen has crawled onto the beach to see Lilith dancing with all the ancestors and the women, and she wants help, and she's had 3 moments where she's lost consciousness, and in those moments she's remembered certain stories. So we've had, I think, The Hare in the Milk, which is out there. It's fine.
Yeah.
The Courage of the Midwives of Egypt, which is hilarious. I love that story. And I'm just about to tell Miriam's Laughter.
Okay.
But I'll do that on Tuesday. We don't record the sessions for public. You know, the whole point is it's for archive. But my husband is getting spookily excited because he's transcribing. But the weird thing is he's running it through Otter and AI to get the transcripts quicker.
Okay.
And people have been saying, I wonder what strange images you're giving the AI now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Because it's taken to summarising things. Let me see if I can find one. He's put a thing up actually in Twilight Tales this morning. And they used to, because they couldn't understand it, so Prince Phoebus became Prince Seabass, which is hilarious.
So you have to go, or someone has to go, and presumably not you if you're dyslexic, but your husband has to go through and check these things and make the changes.
What he does is he's also an editor, and he'll go through transcript, proofread, and then he puts it into a readable transcript, because you have to remember, I'm an oral teller.
Right.
And there'll be something where I might just raise an eyebrow
Right.
or make a gesture, and he has to, which is why he records it, video and sound. He has to find a way to get that on the page without it being clunky.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
and which is, he's a past master at that. But we decided to do something with the Mist Cooker the other day, the Twilight Tales tribe. And they wanted a children's book. So we spent about 6 months, we've got a publisher, spent 6 months going,
Huzzah.
okay, when we finish the cycle that we've just finished, what were your favourite stories that you thought were appropriate? Bearing in mind most of the people that buy this are going to be adults, and we've got about 20 stories, and we've got the most wonderful illustrator. If you want someone interesting as well, Catherine Suter Caddock is an illustrator.
Gotcha.
I don't know whether she uses yet, and she has been illustrating for me for years, but also for storytellers all over.
Oh,
And
okay.
she is the sort of person that can draw what's in my head, which is amazing. And we sat down with this children's book and we thought, what did we want? And I said, Bubbe loved Art Deco. So
Me
we're
too.
doing this book. Do you remember when you were a kid, you'd get those really old books, that you'd open them up and then there'd be like a thin film of like paper, and then there'd be the most beautiful colour plate, and then the story, and then, little black and white borders and everything.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing a book like that for Bubbe.
Oh, that sounds.
I am
That sounds. When do you think that'll come out? You have a publisher for it, so I'm assuming maybe
Yes,
not
we have
for
a
year.
publisher. It's probably we did have a draft ready to go, and then it was all on Simon's laptop, and he hadn't backed it up to the cloud that morning, and his laptop was stolen. But we have all the rough notes, and we are about 50% of the way of re-editing and going through, and lesson learned, really.
Yes.
Lesson
Yeah.
learned. But I think what they're going to try and do is the minute they've been really good about it, and really good about the fact that I'm obviously in recovery, and it's going to be another 6 weeks before I'm kind of leaping small buildings. I'm thinking next year. It's probably we're going to try and get it to the publishers by this summer. But
Okay.
it's slightly hampered by the fact that it takes 6 weeks per drawing for Catherine.
Oh wow.
She doesn't move any faster than that because we've decided on quite an old-fashioned style, so she can't gel print it. She's hand painting every plate.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's incredible. I can't wait to see this.
There's a great one called The Cloud Sheep, and it's a Dutch story. Oh, can I tell you one more story really quickly?
Yes, you can.
You
Yes,
can say
you
no,
can.
shut up, Shonaleigh.
No.
You know.
But what I know. So one of the things. So before you tell the story, if that's all right, one of the things I'd like to what I'd like to ask you is, in your tradition, I have heard that if someone in the audience asks, when you turn around at the end of a story, when I tell the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, no, it's not. What is it? The Three Little Pigs, right? When I tell the story of the Three Little Pigs, the wolf lives to tell the tale another day, and his mother says, that's why you got to watch out for these little pigs, and he did. But then one day he met a girl all in red, but that's a story for another day, right? If someone says to you, no, I want to hear it, is it right that you have to tell it in your tradition?
Yeah, you'll hear me if you ever hear me tell. My stories are peppered with, and why that is another story for another time. And you can stop me and say, I'd like to hear that story, and I have to tell you that story. And within that story, there'll be, but that's another story for another time. And if somebody else asks for that, then you have to tell that. And you can get what my husband calls the lattice, which always
Okay.
makes me think of a Greg's pasty, actually. But
Greg's biggest a food chain.
a
Right.
food chain of dubious pastry natures. But they do a lattice bake, which I don't think has ever seen any meat in its life, but this is it had. So yes, this lattice. You can get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 deep into that, and then the real skill of a Drut'syla is coming back and also saying to the listeners, don't worry, I'll bring you back. You don't have to hold all those stories in your head. I do, you don't. You just concentrate where we are as we move around this world, you know.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. You'll also hear me say, but that's more stories than I can tell you this night. Now, I've done that. That's not part of the tradition. It would have been said at the end of a night, but it would never have been said in the middle of a storytelling. Because if you imagine, and I never say it in Twilight Tales because we don't need to, if I say that's more stories than I can tell you this night, it means if you ask for this story, we will leave this entire subcycle and go somewhere else. And it could take me months to get back to here. Now, if I'm standing on a stage, I don't want to do that. And the way I usually say it to people is, so I've put that in, you know, let's be honest about things. That's not in the original tradition. That would only have been said at the end of a night. I've put that in mainly to say to people, please don't ask for that, because I will have to honour my tradition. And if I go off down this tangent, I'm not going to get back in 25 minutes and everyone in this room is going to want to kill you. So let's not go there. But somebody did once.
They did not. There's
They
always
did.
someone. There's always someone.
I was down south in near Devon, on the coast, what we call the Jurassic coast, because a lot of dinosaurs live down there. And I was telling this story, and I'd said this, and what was I telling? Oh, I was telling the Emerald Sea. But there are points where these stories kind of, you meet characters again and again. So in the Ruby Tree, you meet Tobias, age 7. And in the Emerald Sea, you meet him a lot older. And in the Diamond Girl, you meet him, he's got married now. So you meet these characters all over again. And somebody actually did a whole family tree for the Manassa cycle of all the different families and the way they interact. I have never seen it. Simon's got a copy. I don't ever want to see it, because the weirdest thing is, when I look at things written down, it's like my brain goes, oh, I can forget that now.
Oh, no, don't look at that picture then. Holy cow.
He was through the map of the Ruby Tree once in our dining room. And we live in a cottage. And you know what the old sort of cottages are like in Derbyshire. So we got, you know, stairs in the middle of the house.
Yeah.
One room one side, dining room, and then lots of little weird rooms. And to get to our stairs, because we've blocked off a door, you have to walk out of the dining room, round the back of the house, through the kitchen, through the dining room, and then into my husband's study, through my husband's study, and up the stairs. And every time he was doing this, I had to shout so that he could, because he'd got it on a long piece of paper on the floor. So he literally threw himself bodily onto this floor so that I couldn't see it. And apparently, after months of this incredibly in-depth academic work, he said, I don't want you to really look at it, just glance and glance away. I just want you to see the size of it. Apparently my input was, I think what you need is more stickers. Because I am a fan of stationery. And that's why I say he's the most patient man in the world. But yes, this woman down south, I'd said, don't do this. And I was telling this story. And I said, but that's more stories than I can tell you this night. And I was breathing in to carry on. And she went, I want to hear that. And I thought, oh dear. And I looked at her and she went, nah, just kidding. And I went, No, you said it. And you might be happy to, diss my tradition, but I'm not. So that's where we're going now. Sorry, guys. See her afterwards. And what she'd taken us into was the Ruby Tree, which is 3 stories, 3 sub-cycles before. The Ruby Tree takes me, if I'm really motoring, just telling the arc with none of the other stories, I can do it in about 3 hours. And I managed to get through the Ruby Tree. It was literally this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. I was highlight in 20 minutes and get back to the emeralds.
Oh my gosh. Good for you. That's someone that knows their craft really, really well.
Oh, and also someone that's quite petty, I suppose, as well.
Well, I yes and no. I mean, I just did that to you, right? I mean, I didn't feel that I was dissing your culture, but, maybe that's
when did you do that?
a little earlier on.
Well, when you asked for one. I
Yeah.
think you genuinely wanted to, though.
No, I do. I genuinely want a story.
Difference. If you genuinely want to hear a story,
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing a club in Cambridge, and they've got this little kid in, and a little kid did it. Says, I need to know, and I don't mind that because that's coming from a place of honesty, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
coming from, and everyone was like, oh, and I went, we can do this. What is it you specifically need to know? And he wanted to know about this firewall and what it was. And I just told him really, really quickly. And I didn't feel that he was dissing a tradition. I felt he was absolutely engaged in the story, and he was coming from a place of real grounded honesty, the way kids do, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And I felt that with you as well. And there are times when people can't stop themselves and they do ask. But most of the time I put both hands up as well. And I've only ever had it. But this particular woman, she was just trying to be mischievous,
Yeah. And there are people like that who are just mischievous, and they don't think about the. And I say this because I am one of those people, which mischievous or a complete asshole. It's a fine line. It's a fine.
It is. Yeah.
It is a fine line.
Or trickster
Yes.
energy is a really fine line, isn't it?
It is. It is a very.
We all need a bit of that, I think. The world would be very boring without that.
Yeah, well, I think so. And there's a huge conversation I could have about that, because the counterculture or council, not the council culture, the council.
Dana Council.
Dana Council.
You can't come in here,
they're
mate.
putting up signs again. You can't drive more than 20 miles an hour around here.
Yes.
Although that's in Wales, and that was a really bad southern accent because I'm not in that headspace right now. But anyway.
There's a reason why traditional stories are important.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why we remember them. And it's because they give us a wisdom and a common sense and a common understanding that we've all thought the same things before.
And a moral compass.
And a moral compass.
Yeah.
And an immoral compass sometimes,
Well, that's true, yeah.
It's like I'm doing Lilith at the moment, and everyone's like, oh, Lilith, the feminine energy. Lilith is just chaos.
Why do they say Lilith, the feminine energy, in a negative light?
Well, they talk about, because Lilith is supposed to be a demon. She's not. She was the first wife of Adam. And a lot of the time when I'm telling them much older cycles, there's a phraseology that has an almost rhythmic quality, which is, it's said in commentary. Now, commentary is the rabbinical writings around the subject.
Okay. All
So
right,
it's said in commentary, she's a demon, blah, 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 blah. It's said in song and story because the song and story is what the women held. So you get this kind of... So what Lilith is sexual energy and chaos and untamed wildness. And of course, that can't be good. You can't have women thinking for themselves, can you? Good grief. Where's that going to lead her? She's obviously a demon, bless her. But there's a great line in Song of Lilith. She turns around and she said, if I was made from the same dust as Adam's breast, how come I be demon and he be not?
Right, exactly.
Anyway, I've gone off on another tangent there. Sorry about that.
No, that's a good tangent to go off. That is so cool. So your stories, the recordings that you've got for archival purposes only, are they going to the British Library for or a copy of them going there for safekeeping?
I don't know. You'd have to speak to Simon. I think they're looking at. They have a whole team, or he has a whole team that's looking at archive and retrieval. And we talk to so many people, and the best advice we've got from archivists at the moment is shove it on paper, hermetically seal it, and put it in the British Library. Because if we'd have put it all on floppy disks, we wouldn't be able to read it now. And technology is changing.
Yeah, right.
But putting it on paper, at least if it's hermetically sealed, gives it a little bit more longevity.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that.
We hadn't either. It was an archivist that said that to us.
So Shonaleigh, I do have a couple of questions for you. This conversation has been absolutely wonderful, and I really appreciate you spending all this time.
Thank you. I'm
sharing
going to put my makeup off and go back to bed after this.
I saw that you were not a courtesan, but a consort to Taffy Thomas.
Well, technically, I still am because I've never been replaced. But yes, I was. Taffy was the storytelling laureate, and because he was, older, they wanted someone young that could go around and do stuff. So he decided that he'd like me to be his consort. But my mum, her English is good, but at the time she was in the first stages of dementia, so her English was completely glowed. So she told everybody that I was Taffy's concubine.
How did Simon feel about that?
Well, I think he was all right. He said it was Chrissy, strangely enough, but it was really hilarious. But I love Taffy's sense of humour. Taffy gave me away at my wedding. I've known Taffy.
Oh, he did?
In my adult life.
Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful.
And he gave me away at my wedding. And in his speech, he said, well, this was a paternity suit I wasn't expecting. But my dad, my dad had graduated, died basically. And I didn't have anyone, And I went to him because he's someone I very much respect. And Liz was there as well. They're like my, family.
Your storytelling family.
Yeah.
I do. I like Liz. I drop her a line and send her a postcard every once in a while, just to keep in touch. So the other question I wanted to ask you was, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were younger?
It doesn't matter.
I like that. That's a really good thing. And that's a true thing too, right? It's a very true thing. I think it was when I hit 50 that's when that hit me, is that it really doesn't matter.
It really doesn't. People say things, sometimes hurtful things, sometimes lovely things, sometimes I wish I'd done things. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. Let's just be kind.
Right. Compassionate. Right.
And best practice. It doesn't matter. As long as I'm doing best practice, as long as I'm serving the stories, doing what I'm meant to do. Doesn't really matter.
Your Bubbe must be so proud of you. Have you created a community up where you are?
Yes.
Up in Yorkshire?
I go to 2 or 3 shows. I'm kind of the Drut'syla for the whole of the north, so I go to many.
That's what I wondered.
And I work a lot in Europe and Belfast as well.
Is that because of your connection with Liz, or was that two separate things?
No, she took me to the synagogue years ago, and we had a connection. But Liz was the person that sort of did that for me. But no, I work with a lot of shuls. I work all over, and I did for a while before my mobility issues hit, which I'm getting rid of. I used to teach the rabbis at Leo Beck Rabbinical College
Oh, really?
storytelling.
That's
This is how
awesome.
you unpeel a story. And that inspired me to co-found with a group of amazing women and traditionalists the College of Storytelling.
Nice. And where's that? And that's in
That's in
Yorkshire.
the UK. And we run a lot of courses online, and we don't actually have bricks and mortar at the moment, which I'm quite pleased. We were just about to buy, and then the pandemic hit, so thank goodness we didn't.
Yes.
So yeah, we've founded that. It's 5 very strong women who have been incredible at supporting the tradition, and we have courses, we offer MAs, but there's going to be archiving and library and we run scholarships as well. We also help new artists with commission work and things. So that's something I'm quite proud of as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, storytelling in the UK I feel, because I don't know enough about it, I feel it's really different over there than it is over here. There are more grants, there's more help to create the kind of work that's important, I think.
I think sometimes, yeah. I think the emphasis is on not so much on awards,
Right.
and winning stuff, but about actually, yeah, doing something grounded that's going to last.
Right.
And that's not dissing anything that's done anywhere else, but
Right.
you know, the stuff that Mara's doing with her forest.
Right. That's
you know,
incredible.
Incredible stuff. So you've got these amazing people and these women grounded that are doing all this incredible stuff. So how can we not be hopeful?
I know, right?
And that's great, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
it is.
so much fun.
It is
I'm
fun.
coming over in July as well, so maybe
You're coming to the States in July?
I am.
What
Well,
would it
I'll
take?
have Kathy with me, because it will be my first big international flight without the aid of like all the wheelchairs and bells and whistles and stuff.
Right.
So Cassie's very good at getting around the States.
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm a nightmare because I'm dyslexic. I get on the wrong plane and I end up in all sorts of weird places. I was supposed to go to Singapore and ended up in Shanghai. I kid you not. I had to wait
they both start with an
14
S.
hours. I had to wait 14 hours for a connection. It was hilarious. When I phoned my husband, I'm like, he went, honey, there's nothing I can do.
Well,
The other side of the world, you're going to have to call me. You've got this, honey. You've got this.
But I can't believe that the people at the ticket desk allowed you to get on a plane going to the wrong place. I mean, that's kind of bizarre and in and of its own right anyway, right?
I know. And Shanghai isn't such an international airport, so they all start speaking English at sort of like 6 o'clock at night.
Oh,
So everything's in Chinese, and I'm like, I haven't a clue. And I went up to this one woman who tried to sell me a teach yourself Chinese, and I'm thinking, even in 14 hours, I'm gonna. And then one really nice woman said, if you go and sit outside first class, they're still doing the announcements in English. So I got on the right.
Oh, of course they're doing the announcements in English.
Of course, darling.
For first class.
Yes. Yes, of course they are, sweetie. But yes, Cassie can get me around the States very easily.
Okay. So, Shonaleigh, my last question is a question that I ask most people on this show is, what is your favourite breakfast? Where would your favourite place be to eat that breakfast? And who would you like to be eating it with?
This is going to sound so boring. There is a restaurant now called Carluccia's.
Okay.
And when I was coming out the other side of my attack, my husband and my son used to scoop me up every Sunday morning. And I literally needed to be scooped up and carried. And they would take me to Carluccia's, who were very kind people. And we would sit there and they would open half an hour early for us. And we would have breakfast together. And my favourite breakfast was poached eggs on toast and black coffee. Very boring. But we would catch up. And at the end of the breakfast, me and my husband and my son would all go, well, we're not dead yet. It's to another week. And it would be great because I hadn't realised that they had gone through as much trauma as I had. And it was just a way of kind of rebonding and also what I didn't realise at the time, my husband getting used to being out in public again without being scared. And so, yeah, poached eggs on toast, black coffee at Carluccio's with, can I have two people? My husband and son.
That's excellent.
And I'm sure Bubbe's there in spirit.
I bet she is, sitting there on your shoulder.
What's wrong with porridge?
So my absolutely last question is, how do they cook the poached eggs? Do they do it in one of the little poacher things, or do they just drop it in boiling water?
Oh no, they just drop it in boiling water.
Excellent.
And he showed me how they did it. Apparently what they do is they drop the egg in a mixture of water and vinegar, warm water and vinegar, and they just put it in a bowl and they just slosh it, and it makes the outside of the egg start up. And then they get the water simmering and then they just put it in hot water.
Oh, that's really cool.
Poached egg.
My granddad. That's how my granddad was a poached egg and porridge person, actually, and he would always poach his eggs in dropping it in boiling water. My mum would have one of those little poacher, but she was a child who, a mother in the 70s. So I think that's what everybody did in the 70s, right? Shonaleigh, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time for this conversation with you. It's been an absolute delight. I can't imagine a better way, for me at least, to spend today so far. So thank you so much indeed. I hope our listeners have enjoyed you as much as I have. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simon. It's been great.
You're welcome.
We had a great time, and I hope you did too, enjoying our chat and learning a bit along the way. Thanks for being here. There are so many other places you could be. Shonaleigh did share a story with me, which you can find at Patreon by paying anything from $1 for an episode you enjoyed to a regular monthly subscription. In return, you get extras like the story, early releases, and other exclusive content on my work. That's www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. It takes around 4 hours or more to make each episode, not including getting in touch with folks, setting it all up, and the marketing before and after. And I don't have advertisers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to check out other episodes that you might have missed. You can find me and my work on Facebook, and my website, Simon Brooks Storyteller, and on Instagram, Simon M. Brooks. Diamond Scree? Yep, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. Sign up for newsletters and more. A shout out to Chris Jett for creating and recording the music for me for my podcast. His band is called Blackpool Mecca. And again, help keep the podcast going and support the arts by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. Cheers.
It's just a story.